Hello, everyone. It has been a long time. Welcome back to book club. For those of you who don't know what we're doing today, it's a very special day because we are going to be talking about this wonderful book, which I'm sure pretty much all of you have read, and if you haven't, please do. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter what your job is, where you come from. I think this is a very important book for everyone to read. And Emily herself is going to come on to talk about this. Emily is actually, fun fact, the first recurring book club guest. So that's fun. Emily came on last year to talk about Play It As It Lays by Joan Didion. And it's actually funny because a lot of the themes of that book actually are covered in her book, but her book is obviously very modern and talks about right now. So these themes, though, a lot of them are not new. Women have been experiencing a lot of the things that she experienced and talks about her book forever. And before I bring her on, because I know we all want to hear from her, I just want to say how vulnerable she makes herself in this book, how honest she is. And also, it is, you know, you relate in some way to, at least for me, I relate in some way to every book that I read. But to read a book that I think hits very close to home for me, and not just because Emily and I have worked in the same industry, I think just what you go through as a young woman in society is she just words things very honestly and bravely and puts things down that I think a lot of us have felt and haven't been able to find the words to say. And so I want to thank her for doing that and for opening up the conversation about a lot of these things. And so that's why I highly recommend this book to anyone who hasn't read it. I read it as soon as it came out and got to reread it again in preparation. I have a million notes. I'm going to try to not talk too much because I want to hear from Emily, but I have so many questions for her. So I guess let's bring her on without further ado. And yeah, also, I don't want to embarrass her while she's on here, but she's a New York Times bestselling author. And that's very exciting because last time she was on here, she was not. So it makes me very happy to see a fellow reader become a best-selling author. That's wonderful and not an easy thing to do. So congratulations, Emily. Let's bring her on.
Oh my gosh.
Hello!
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Welcome back on.
Thank you so much. You're so good at those intros, but thank you so much for not bringing me on for that. I would have been...
No, I was like, I'm going to get this out of the way now so that I can just ask you the real questions.
But thank you for all of everything you said. It's really...
Of course. I meant it all, and congratulations. I know, like, was this book already done when you had come on, but it wasn't out yet? Or what where were you in the process?
Remember, when I came on, it was like June or something of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I was still editing it, but I would say all the essays in some version existed. Just, you know, drafts. It took me years to write the
Yeah.
So
like, when did you start writing the essays? And then what ultimately led you to publish them in this format?
So I started writing really kind of therapeutically for myself. I always like love doing creative things, but I feel like I always love doing creative. But... Sorry, is there a delay? Am I good?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. And yeah, this was just something that was like, I really was doing it for myself. As somebody who loves reading, it felt like, you know, I'd always loved writing, but it always felt kind of pressurized. So in some ways it was a way of processing emotions and also just challenging myself creatively. And then at a certain point I had like a lot of writing and I started to think about like, this could be a book, but I also really wary of the idea of going to agents or literary agents and saying like, I want to write a book without really showing them what I wanted to write about and showing them the writing.
Right.
I basically wrote a rough draft of the book. And then At that point, I found an amazing agent. We put together the book proposal, which was essentially all the essays, and New York Magazine chose Buying Myself Back, which was
Mm-hmm.
the essays in there that was, you know, not even one I had really thought. I don't know. I was really excited and happy they chose it, but I was surprised. And,
Yeah.
you know, the release of that encouraged me to really want to publish the book.
Yeah. And I remember reading that, and I also remember that situation, and I feel like you were one of the first people. I mean, for those of you that don't know what happened, where you posted a paparazzi picture and ultimately got sued by the person who took it because
Mm-hmm.
you own the image, even though it's an image of you that you didn't give them
Mm-hmm.
permission to take. And I remember reading that and seeing that happen, and I didn't even know that that was a thing, that you could get sued for that. Um, did you feel like writing about it or coming out about it gave you sort of an ownership over a situation that you didn't originally have that sort of ownership over?
Yeah, I mean, at first I was really nervous to sort of talk about the paparazzi thing because
Mhm.
I feel like, you know, celebrity culture is not something that's I don't always have empathy for it.
Yeah, I really like
And
porn.
yeah, I was like, you know, although I just saw this video of Kendall Jenner like chasing down a TMZ like paparazzi car, and
Mhm.
all the comments were like, "Yes, girl." So maybe
Yeah.
the tides have changed. And by the way, yes, girl, like good she did that. But
Mhm.
no, I think that, you know, that essay really was exploring ways that, you know, I feel like I created this image, this like caricature of myself that's super one dimensional. And, you know, I would sometimes it was something I created through Instagram, but then more often it was something that was sort of like created by other people and then taken and dispersed. And it
Mhm.
felt like these other Emilys existed in the world, and a lot of them were sort of owned or
Mhm.
created by men. And, you know, as much as I felt like, okay, I'm this model and I have this career that I'm really proud of, why do I feel so out of control? And, you know, that
Mhm.
essay explored different instances. The paparazzi was sort of the like lightest version of that.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
examples. Um,
Mhm.
and yes, it did make me feel more in control. And the fact that, you know, people responded to the writing and the storytelling was
Mhm.
so, it really was encouraging.
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand it's like a hard thing. People don't always have empathy for those situations, but I think also the other examples that you give in that story, and ultimately that I at least have felt like there are a million versions of me also that live in the world. And sometimes it can feel like a protection, like
Mm.
something you can hide behind, and almost like a wall that you sort of have protecting you. But at other times, it can backfire and,
Yeah.
hurt the real you. And I think it's sometimes hard to make that distinction.
Yeah, I really relate to that. And, you know, I think the thing that so many women related to is like the validation that you seek in situations, not just, you know, as a model, but, you know, with,
Mm-hmm.
in general, and how it's
Mm-hmm.
like both really, I mean, in my case, it felt really terrifying and also kind of like, um, you know, I want to say almost sexy, like the power of feeling like, okay, I'm taking these pictures. You know, then there's this experience I've had, and I think every woman I know has had where, you know, you grow up a little bit or you're a little bit older and you're like, that was not what I thought it was when I was 19 or whatever.
Completely. I also think being quite young, I know you started at a young age as I did. You have a false sense of being in control
Yeah.
in moments, and it can be very liberating you feel very much in control of your own body and the way that people respond to it. And then you look back and you think, well, these people were a lot older than me. They had a very different outlook on it that I wasn't aware of at the time. And
Yeah.
you talk about, how freeing it was for you to use your body, but also that you realize now you owe things to men, or this career that sort of men ultimately were in control of when you thought that you were the one who had the power.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what, you know, obviously I feel that in my career and in my life, but I feel that also in like romantic situations in my
Mhm.
or just even in professional situations outside of the industry where you're trying to, you know, I think women feel like they have the power because desirable. But that's true. And that's what I was really interested in exploring in the book, is like what is empowerment, what is like desire, what is like being, you know, using your body in this way. I really, as a woman, whether it's just like how you get dressed in the morning. I mean, so a lot of the essays are from, you know, when I was very young, like middle school and high school. Where does the sort of, what is this contradiction of like feeling so validated and then also feeling really completely abused in some ways?
And objectified, yeah. And I love, I mean, you speak so beautifully and amazingly about both your parents, your mom specifically, and you give the example of you going to the school dance in a dress that you had bought with her that they deemed too sexy, which I hate that word because I think, what is sexy? Like, I think that that's, you know, and to tell a child that they are too sexy, I think is just awful. But that your mom said, you know, it's on them. Like, that's their problem. Do you feel like her sort of outlook and her attitude towards that helped shape your views on, you know, the way that you dressed, or basically the way that you presented yourself to the world?
Yeah, definitely. I think she was, you know, as I write about in the book, her father had really kind of made her feel like the way she looked and her beauty and her body was something to be ashamed of in some ways. And, you know, never say, you know, thank you because you didn't do anything to deserve the way you look, whatever. And I, you know, having a daughter, something she really wanted for me was for me to like enjoy my body and
Yeah.
being a young woman. And yeah, so I definitely think it shaped me. And I think there was this attitude of kind of like, yeah, I should enjoy this and I want to celebrate it. And there are so many, it's so funny. Right when you said that, I was thinking about, I went to, I think it was like a CR fashion book, New York Fashion Week party. I don't know, like 2016 something, for this Julian McDonald dress that was like really sexy. And I remember it was almost like it was the same situation that I had had when I was 14 at the dance, because, you know, everyone was like looking at me and it was like, oh my God, I'm getting all this attention. But then, you know, all these people were calling it vulgar. Like there were, you know, public personas being like, oh, what's such a vulgar dress and da da da. And so there's just always been this double-edged sword for, you know, using my body and being a woman.
Yeah, and the fact that people think it's an invitation to comment on, I don't know when it became okay. I mean, I guess it's always been in society okay, even though it's not okay to comment on a woman's appearance. And I also want to talk about beauty and worth. And why do you think that we as a society conflate the two? Like, they almost become contingent on one another, and yet they're also so scrutinized as well.
Yeah. I mean, I thought a lot about this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in many ways, the world we live in now rewards beauty. I mean, at least in our experience, like being is such a, it's provided a lifestyle for us. It's, you know, a career. And I think that that speaks to the industry and capitalism and whatever. But I think, you know, beauty becomes this thing that is so, I mean, I want to be careful how I put it. But I think women feel like it's the ultimate, or at least I did as a young person, even like the thing I wanted more than anything was to be beautiful, not to be like famous, rich or super smart, funny, or a lot of great friends, which
Yeah.
get old, or at least for me as I got older, I was like, these are the things that are important to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wanted to be beautiful because I think that's, you know, as from my vantage point at a very young age, and I think still, maybe it speaks to your question basically, that, you know, it seems like that's the ultimate power you can have as a woman, being beautiful and being desirable in a way that I don't think it's the same for men.
No, and I also think that goes back to, you know, feeling powerful as a woman walking into a room, having people look at you, and then at the same time realizing that is that really power, or like are the eyes that are looking at me really the ones that are in power?
Yeah, and I guess I just realized that so many of my friends, like we're all playing the same game in many ways, even if they're not
Mhm.
fashion models, they're, want to go into a party and be noticed by guys or wear a big
Mhm.
outfit. I mean, obviously that's like what what our world revolves around in some way.
Mhm.
And, I think that what I wanted to sort of say to anyone who's looked at my life as this, persona and see
Mhm.
the success and what you see online, which is like very glamorous, and realize that I think it's kind of a losing game, essentially.
Mhm. Exactly. Because then there's also, and I know you talk about this in your book, a common belief that women have to cover up to be taken seriously. You talk about acting
Hmm.
and how, you know, a lot of young women feel that in order to make the transition from like sexy to a serious actress, you have to change the way that you dress, or in business as a woman, you have to wear a suit and not show skin if you want to be taken seriously in a meeting. And it kind of goes along with that, like you have to act like one of the guys to be taken seriously, which I disagree with. And do you think, I mean, one, I want you to talk a little bit about what you experienced with that from feeling like you had to cover up. And then also, do you think that that's part of the reason why, as women, like being naked is almost freeing in a way?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. People always kind of ask me, like, so what do you think? Like, should a woman be naked or not? And I'm like,
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know.
um, I'm still trying to figure that out. But yeah, so I mean, I think that one of the examples in the book that I use is being cast in Gone Girl,
Mhm.
Mistress by David Fincher, and these really nice hair and makeup women who were like my friends by the end of the job shooting
Mhm.
the long shoot. Um, some like old modeling photos of me got released, and they were like all over Daily Mail, and they were like kind of sexy. They weren't crazy, but I was topless. And I was covered, but topless,
Mhm.
bringing it up to me and being like, you have to stop doing shoots like that, and I was so embarrassed because I was like, oh, those were older, and these were like iconic, they're working day pictures.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and we're in the trailer, and they're like, you have to stop doing shoots like that, it's not going to be good for you. And I was like, oh my God, those are old. And
Mhm.
but then the irony of it was that, I had been cast, and I mean, I auditioned and I went through the whole process and earned the role. But, the reason that I was even considered for the role was because I had been in Blurred Lines, which obviously was
Mhm.
kind of the perfect example. So again, it was this sort of mixed messaging of
Yeah.
like celebrating and shaming women who,
Mhm.
choose to use their body in that way. And
Yeah.
again, I was so young. I don't know. Now I look back and I'm like, I feel like being 30 and choosing to wear a
It's
skirt or do a skirt,
different.
yeah, it's different.
And same with relationships, being 30 and choosing to be in a relationship or choosing to have a certain encounter and then being 18, 19. Like, consent means different things, I think, at those ages.
I
Um,
completely,
so I completely agree with that. But yeah, we're getting sent mixed messages as well. So it's kind of like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and on that topic, you have an essay about Pamela Anderson, which ironically was before. I know everyone's now like, I feel like she's kind of had a resurgence of people discussing what happened to her because of the show that came out. But I think what she went through, um,
Hmm.
having something released of her without her consent, something stolen from her, and the way that the public just condemned her and made it her fault, which I think you've experienced with people releasing things of you without your consent, and kind of how society is so quick to blame the woman who got naked and
Hmm.
not the people who are exploiting the woman.
Yeah.
Um, and I know you have a lot of experience with that, so I wanted to get sort of your take on her and you and all of the women that has happened to.
Yeah. It's interesting to see all this like conversation around her because the essay is really about me going to a party with my husband, and this man kind of like insulting me, being like, oh yeah, everyone's so obsessed with you, you're like Pamela Anderson before the Hep C. And me already kind of feeling uncomfortable at the party and salt. And I was really interested in kind of exploring like why, like, why, I mean, obviously the Hep C thing, it's like so
Mm-hmm.
but then I ended up looking into her story, and I didn't actually know, right, you know, in that moment, that the sex tape had been stolen from her home. Um, and, you know, it was kind of an amazing thing to realize, like, oh my God, like even my perception of this story as somebody who, has a lot of parallels to this woman, and
Mm-hmm.
like I even had it wrong.
Yeah.
So, I think that just speaks so much to the way that our culture does kind of twist the narrative. And I, when you look at old talk shows and everything, there was this sort of feeling of like, well, come on, she like, she got hurt.
Yeah,
But
she
the
was
fact is like,
asking.
yeah, I mean, she did become super famous and, whatever, but not in the way she necessarily wanted to be.
No.
That was so private. And so, I mean, I can't imagine how horrifying. And she's actually had, like, an incredibly difficult life,
Mhm.
that the show doesn't even cover,
Mhm.
for Tommy Lee. And it makes me very emotional thinking about her life and like what she, like this very talented kind of, very smart woman, and what happened to her and what was taken out of her control.
Mhm. Yeah, and I also found it. You talk about the book that was published with your name, with private images of you, with zero consent from you. Um, and then the fact that, I mean, and this was during a time when there was social media. Like,
Mm-hmm.
she couldn't go on Twitter and come out and say, I didn't, this was not my choosing. Wanting private things, like almost wanting to take that from women and then blaming them.
Yeah.
And how it felt like for you to see images of you that you did not, give your consent, and see people almost celebrate them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, I think the attitude was like, well, everyone's seen you naked before, so like, who cares? And, honestly, I don't think if I had ever, like, if I hadn't published a first person essay explaining and really taking people through that experience, I don't know that they would have felt sympathy, or even understanding. But I mean, I think for me, yeah, there's this misunderstanding I've had in my life where I think control means empowerment. Like the idea that, okay, well, and I do think that there's huge importance around consent, but I think that even the conversations that are happening right now of kind of like how complicated consent is, because,
Mm-hmm.
women are kind of trained because of the overall kind of framework of our culture. So
Mm-hmm.
it's not just about a no or a whatever. And I
Mm-hmm.
think also something I was curious and just kind of wanted to talk about was, these moments where you do kind of think you're in control. And, like I did say on Twitter, like, okay, I don't, please don't buy this book. This was published without my consent, whatever.
Yeah.
And it still didn't, do anything. And
Mm-hmm.
I've also found in my life that, a lot of the times when I try to have control, it's almost like more frustrating. And that's how the book is sort of, and I mean, I don't want to give anything away, but where I am now in my life is that, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and on the topic of consent, this just reminded me there's this woman named Michaela Bohm who has this wonderful podcast. I don't know if you know of her. But she said something that really struck me, that especially being in an industry where, when at a very young age, when you're being asked for consent and you don't really know how to give it. And she said, your yes means nothing until you learn how to say no.
Mm,
A
yeah.
lot of young women haven't learned how to say no. And so we're giving these yeses that, or gray area yeses that don't actually have any power because we haven't figured out how to say no yet. And that's something that I experienced being very young and still experience. It's like exercising the no so that your yes actually means
Right. Right. So that the yes feels so good, like good and like agreeing to something, but you've learned like what you actually want and desire. Yeah.
complete.
In one of my first experiences of not knowing how to say yes or no was in high school when I was like 14, 15 with my first boyfriend.
Mhm.
Wasn't even somebody that I really liked. Like I didn't have a crush on him. I just sort of like got into this relationship with him that was,
Mhm.
way ahead of what I was ready for in a lot of ways. And, you know, it always embarrassed me that that I'd had this, you know, like people talk about first love, and that had not been my experience. I didn't have this like sweet romantic first love. I had this kind of like fucked up thing that, you know, I didn't feel in control of. And that was sort of, when I look back, one of just an early example of the ways that I had learned not to know how to just say what I want and assert, or even connect, forget say, but even connect to what I want, because I felt sort of like, I don't know, just passive in a way that it shocks me now to think about my 14-year-old self and how I learned that, because you know, my parents were very much the type of people who were like, go be assertive. You know, they taught me about strong women, and those were the women I looked up to, and yet that was still my experience. So
Yeah, and as much I think as your parents can teach you that, it's also so much of society. And I think that, you know, as women we are taught to, you don't want to offend anyone. You want to like step out of place. And so especially as a young woman, you don't want to offend anyone or disrespect anyone. And I have found that, I think, especially being young, and this is something I think you learn as you get older, is you choose to, you'd rather disrespect yourself than disrespect the other person. And I think in this, you don't want to cause any problems. And so you stop trusting your body. And then the second you stop trusting your body, I think that gets carried on way later into life. So then when you're on a job, or when someone else is asking you something, you've already started going against what your body's instinct is. And that's what can lead you to doing things that you're not comfortable with.
yeah,
But you're not connected enough, like you said, to your body to be able to vocalize that.
yeah, you betray your instincts because because you think that that's what you should do. And that's, yeah, and I just can't believe how young I learned that. I think that's the thing that just kind of still blows my mind, you know, and it makes me feel really, even though, you know, all the time when I was doing book press, people were kind of like, well, how have things changed, you know, culturally in the industry, but even just for young women in general. And I'm hesitant to be like, things are so different now, because I don't know that, I think that there are, you know, even just us having this conversation, my ability to write the book, the Me Too movement, I think the way people like Gen Z is talking about empowerment is so interesting and much more sophisticated than the conversation we were even having 10 years ago. But I still think that kind of our baseline is really the same. And I think that women are still dealing with the same shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And no matter what industry you're in, I think like a lot of these issues get brought to the surface in the industry that we are in. But it isn't, you know, unique for modeling or acting. It's very much, I think, something that a lot of women experience, just like the idea of being at the mercy of powerful men. Can you talk about your experience standing up to these men, you know, men like Steve, who you mentioned in your book, and sort of what you feel like it's cost you or what you've gained from it?
Well, so it's funny because I think the letter to Steve, which is sort of like the angry moment of the book, which felt good, really good to write. I name who he is, and there are a lot of men in the book that I'm, you know, I think just because I'm trying to explain the specifics of a situation, and I think that the reader bringing their knowledge of, let's say, the blurred line set is important to understand kind of, you know, what my experience was. Or, you know, in that letter, there's a few different men that I sort of like called different names, and I don't say their names. And a friend of mine was like, why did you do that? And I was like, well, I just don't want to deal with it. And, you know, because basically the answer is yes, it felt really great and good to be able to express anger, to kind of be able to process these experiences, and then also, you know, just seeing the reaction from other women and whatever makes me feel really great. That said, when before the book was published, the thing about Robin Thicke was leaked, and the essay wasn't available for anyone to read, and so the whole thing sort of became like, oh, this kind of, it turned the book into something it wasn't, you know, on a kind of mass.
Yeah.
And I watched this really complicated experience I have kind of be diminished into this one little headline. And, you know, I think that not, you know, just similar from what we've seen a lot of women in the public, but just in general, when they speak out about something, it's sort of just, you have this instant reaction of like, oh, they're complaining, they're whatever.
Yeah.
And it
Or,
was hard.
and like being an angry woman is not something that is celebrated or like,
No.
crazy.
Hard, you know, I had people kind of coming to me and being like, so great that you spoke out against or like said this. And I was like, no, 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 that's not it either. I want you to read the essay.
Yeah, that's not the point.
Yeah, because it's a complicated thing I have with these men. But basically I would say that it's not like, yeah, I exposed all these like motherfuckers and like my life is so great. I think it's really hard. And I often, you know, at like industry type things, I can tell that there's this sort of like attitude of, oh, like she, you know, careful what you say around her.
Right.
Yeah.
But I also think like the fact that, and I think you did a really incredible job of this, the fact that the actual situations where I've never related, like that was the point in the book where I was like, because you talk about you felt naked for the first time that day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something I relate to so much because I have also done photo shoots naked.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you go through a whole day and you don't feel naked at all. And then sometimes there's one person or
Mm-hmm.
one instance where all of a sudden you become very aware of
Yeah.
how naked you are. And it's terrifying. And it can happen in a split second, like you said. And so the fact that that was sort of the punchline of that story, I thought was really good for people to understand that it wasn't about the fact that you were naked, it was what made you feel naked.
Yeah, I think also just, you know, I had for a long time been like, I was empowered in that video, partly because I feel really good. And that's true.
Mm-hmm.
Of that video I did. And, you know, again, like, I don't think that that person is a bad person, or I think if anything, what I tried to do was paint the ways that men feel entitled, maybe because of their own insecurity, to
Mm-hmm.
to women's bodies, or to kind of like knock you down a peg because they feel like, oh, she has too much power in this moment because of her
Mm-hmm.
body, whatever.
Yes. Can
And
I remind?
yeah, I think it's really important. I have a son now, and when I think about like him growing up, I think like it's not just that I have to be like learn how to respect women, whatever, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but also I think he needs to like understand there's ways that men are made to feel really insecure. Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's this great book called Men, Masculinity, and it's called The Will to
It's
Change.
all to
But
change. I was
yeah,
literally gonna say, yeah.
and I like think it's really an interesting kind of outlook of this empathetic way of thinking about men. Like, listen, I hate men, but also I feel very empathetic
Yeah.
with them.
Well, they also don't have. Yeah, I think that book, because someone recommended that book to me, and I was like, oh, boo hoo, like poor men. And I was reading it, and I was like, oh. And I actually wanted to ask you because I know that you're a mom now, and what do you want to teach your son about women and how to treat them?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. He's a baby right now, so I'm just trying to make him feel good and confident and all those things, and you know, sleeping through the night and all the basics. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think when I think about even the men who I write about in the book, I don't feel this sort of like, oh, they're such assholes. I feel like, wow, they are also a part. Nobody is doing well under patriarchy, essentially.
Mhm.
And I think that toxic masculinity and the ways that we teach men that they kind of have to prove themselves, and disconnect to their emotions and their feelings. And there's so many things that I think about, and I'm very scared because I want my son to be able to express himself and not feel I have to be a man thing. And I think that is a direct pipeline. That kind of attitude is how,
Absolutely.
yeah. So that's it.
And I love that you end the book, talking about the experience of having your son. How has having a son changed your perspective and also changed your relationship to your body?
Oh my God. I'm like, this is book two. Basically, such a long answer. There's so many feelings I have. I think that becoming a mother is this insane transition. I was definitely one of those people who was like, well, I'll be the same, but you're not totally the same, because you are always responsible for this person, and you start seeing your life through their perspective as like their mother, and you
Mm-hmm.
you see your own self through as their mom, and even when you're away from them, you are worried about them and you're thinking about them, and yeah, my body, I mean, I think pregnancy and birth for me really made me be able to appreciate what a body is really meant for, which is
Mm-hmm.
through life, through for health, for ability to, take a bike ride, or eat
Mm-hmm.
food, or just enjoy the earth, as that sounds, and also to bring new life into the world. And I was really, talk about lack of control. I mean, when you're pregnant, you just like wake up every day, weird new symptom, your belly's bigger, you're like, what the hell is going on? And then this day is coming where you're going to give birth, and you're like, what is that going to be like? So you really have to surrender control. And I just, I went with it. I really surrendered control. I mean, here I watched every single birth vlog that was available on YouTube, and did as much research as possible. But I,
That you can only control it, you know.
yeah, and I just sort of, what I found actually was really interesting from all this research was that, the more you kind of trusted, a lot of these women said, the more they trusted their body to, they let go of fear, they were able to have better birth experiences. And that was true for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, postpartum is a wild ride that's separate, but I definitely think, I think that the appreciation I have for my body is this really
Mm-hmm.
wide, ancient machinery. I just never had that before. So I'm grateful for that experience.
Yeah, and do you think that years of not trusting your body or learning how to trust your body, how to trust your instincts, almost prepared you for the experience of being a mother?
Yeah, I do. I'm a hypervigilant queen. So I think the hypervigilance comes into play with my son in ways that I'm actually grateful for in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think that honestly, I had written a lot of the book, and I think that, then having this, and I had the working title of my body, and then having the experience of growing this baby as I was editing it. I mean, that was just, yeah, it was kind of a huge moment in my life. I also turned 30. It was a global pandemic. It was a wild,
Mm-hmm. A lot happened.
a lot
You
happened.
became a New York Times bestselling author. A lot
Yeah,
happened.
it's been a crazy, yeah. But I mean, just as far as, I think I wouldn't have been able to appreciate and enjoy the pregnancy. I'm not even sure if I would have wanted to be pregnant in the same way that I did,
Mm-hmm.
had I not have written these essays and sort of like realized what my relationship was with my body, because I didn't understand the disassociation. I didn't really,
Mm-hmm.
and something that I totally could put my finger on, and I wrote this book to do that.
Completely. It's like you're too close to the painting sometimes. And I think putting it down on paper where you can actually look at it, you're like, oh, this is what was going on.
Yeah.
Um, so I relate to that so much. And I don't want to keep you forever, but I want to ask, what do you hope young girls, and I myself am a young girl, but I also feel like I've been through a lot of the things that you've been through. So I feel like I too have some sort of a perspective, but reading this gave me even more perspective on some things that I still um, am struggling with myself. So what do you hope that young girls take away from the book?
I think that we think, or I have thought that, if only like my butt was bigger, or my nose was smaller, or if I, lost that 5 pounds or gained that 10 pounds or whatever, and I had this kind of beauty, or we look at celebrities or models and we're like, if I looked like her, if I had this attitude, like everything would be good. I would be,
Mm-hmm.
I would, my life would be what I want it to be. I'd have the man of my dreams, I'd have the, house, whatever. And I don't think that's true. And I think that this book, in order for people to be able to realize, women and young women especially, to just enjoy their lives and themselves and not be so caught up in the beauty myth, the beauty hustle. And again, the truth is like, I have had a really great life in many ways because I played that game. So I would never tell a young woman not to model, for example. But I just think that it's important for, you know, that's not the messaging of the book.
No.
The messaging of the book is like, let's look at this framework of the world we live in and the culture we live in, and let's be honest about what like winning is versus, you know, and I mean, I think we kill ourselves to try to attain something that's really difficult.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for being on here, for writing this book. I hope that we get more writing from you so I can have you on a third time.
Honored to be a part of the book club always, and thank you so much for having me on and for reading the book. And yeah, we'll have to continue this conversation in person.
Yes, thank you so much, Emily.
Bye.
Bye. Wow, I really got like choked up. I just want to say thank you everyone for listening. Again, if you haven't read this book, I think it's so important. I really might start crying right now, but I just think that Emily talks about things that, at least personally, I have had a very hard time sort of putting words to and understanding. And I think that that comes with age and with experience. And so for someone like Emily to share her wisdom, her experience, her strength with us, I think empowers all of us. And I really, really could not recommend this book more. Thank you everyone for watching, and hopefully we'll be back with another book club very soon.